I'm Tina Reno. My spouse, John, is a first responder who's been diagnosed with PTSD. And I'm here to talk about how PTSD affected our family and how we came out on the other side. I just want people to know that there is hope going forward. My husband, John, is a first responder. He's a police officer here in London. And we met in the military in the early 90s and have been together ever since.
Have you or your first responder spouse ever been diagnosed with PTSD?
John was officially diagnosed in January of 2020, started seeking help in November of 2019. He was undiagnosed for 5 years, so our children, who are young adults now, lived through their teenage years with undiagnosed PTSD in the home. The symptoms that I noticed most of all were maybe easy to anger. Somebody who doesn't have PTSD don't react in the same way. John was very good at burying things. He didn't want anybody to know. And he felt that if anybody was going to know what PTSD was like, he would recognize it. And so he definitely didn't have that. So a lot of our pre-diagnosis conversations were surface conversations, and they were avoiding topics where we were talking about easy everyday things, not the hard stuff. And I'm a fixer, so I like to fix things. Something that I learned later on after diagnosis, that I couldn't fix this. This was something that he had to do on his own and ask for help. You know, a recommendation to get help when I realized it was beyond what I could do is where the healing journey started.
How did your spouse's diagnosis of PTSD impact the relationship with you and your family?
We were all burying our heads in the sand a little bit. And so it was easier to acquiesce to him a lot of the time. It was easier to do that than it was to argue. On the surface, anybody looking in would have saw a very loving family, would have seen two people who are perfect for each other. And I think the surface side of it is still very much true, but at home I felt isolated some of the time, a lot of the time. I felt that I wasn't being heard. It was often spoken over. It shook my confidence for sure. For a window of time in between when, we first realized things were not great and when he actually got diagnosed, I was less of the person that I used to be. I have to say that that's changed quite a lot for me. I'm very much the person I was 10 years ago. My children had a rocky relationship with their dad in that they often felt, again, unheard, and they couldn't understand why their dad was always mad. And so I often felt like a translator as well. When we were able to have the conversation of dad struggling, what do we do next? My kids were much more open to helping him along the way. So I would say that then it was a struggle because they never knew which dad they were going to walk into a room and see. So when we told the kids, and I mean in the beginning John was adamant that him, myself, and his therapist were the ones that were going to know about this, and that was it. But as he became more open to the topic and we decided we would tell our kids and tell our family, our kids had the best responses. My eldest said, "It's about time," because he'd been through university and he'd known that there is no shame in asking for help. You'd go to the doctor if you needed stitches. What's the difference? So that was one of the kind of breakthrough moments.
When did you or your first responder spouse know they needed to seek support from a mental health professional?
We have a very definitive date of when we knew that he needed to start getting help. And That conversation came around as we were preparing to go out for the evening. He was trying to calm himself down. He was having anxiety about leaving the house. And as we started to drive, he was visibly upset. And so I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "I don't know." I said, "We need to go home. Pull this car over. I'll drive. I don't care, but take me home." So we came home and had one of the most open conversations that we've ever had, which started with me asking him what was wrong with him. But I wasn't quite so polite. And you know, that's kind of where it started, because I had said to him in that evening conversation of, "You can't talk to me, so find someone that you can." And I said, "And why can't you talk to me? Why couldn't you tell me this?" He said, "I didn't want you to know." And that was the biggest thing, is that he didn't want me to know or to think that he wasn't the strong person or the same person that I married. Where in all honesty, had he just told me, we might have been able to catch this earlier on. But the mindset of the policing world, even as recent as 10 years ago, the stigma that was attached to mental health didn't allow for him to express himself in the way that he should have. So once it was decided that John was going to get help, within 2 weeks was seeing a mental health professional. And that was a big step forward for him, but for us as well.
What challenges did you experience during this process?
PTSD is very selfish, and it's not linear. And so in the beginning, I didn't know where I fit in his healing. And it's not where I thought I was going to be after 25 years of marriage. I didn't know where I fit, because I'm a fixer, because I want to help, because I'm a nurturer. And it was something that he needed to do on his own. I felt like I was on the outside looking in. And when people would see me, "How's John?" was always the question. But nobody ever asked me. And meanwhile, I'm at home, I'm in the corner sucking my thumb, crying puddles of tears, because nobody understands where I was going through, and there wasn't a lot of help out there for me. I didn't have the ability to speak freely with very many people. My family is a good support to me, but they don't understand PTSD. So the hard part was to be able to be supportive to John, but to still be the version of myself my kids needed, which is hard when you're falling apart a little bit too. And I would cry at the drop of a hat in my house. But outside it's fine, things are good, he's doing okay, we're working through it. Some days are better than others. All of those things that I would say on a regular basis were half-truths, because really I wasn't okay.
What encouraged you to seek out mental health support for yourself, and how did it help you in your recovery?
I think that seeing that John was getting the help that he needed, my kids were getting the help that they needed, and then it was time for me to take my own advice. I am very lucky that I was in university at the time, and a girl in the class said, "I see someone, a social worker, I think she'd be great for you. Here's her contact information." And so I've been seeing a social worker since at least 4 years, maybe 5. When I called her and started talking to her, it was a light bulb moment. It was, this is what I needed, because being able to talk to somebody without having to start that far back, because my friends had good intentions and they helped in the way that they could. But when you're talking about how PTSD is affecting your family, and you have to explain PTSD and what it is and how it presents in your family first, it's just exhausting. And it's a deterrent to wanting to speak to people other than on a surface level. I also felt very isolated. And so by getting the help of seeing my social worker and opening up to, talking to John a little bit more and saying, I need, something as much as, or as little as a hug, but being afraid to approach him with that prior to my starting to get help for myself. That was kind of the turning point, was that after I'd been seeing Mary Jane for a little while, I was able then to say what I needed and to advocate for myself.
What are some ways spouses can support their first responder spouse with their mental health?
Ideally, in a perfect world, they would go to get mental health assistance before things get bad. That's one of the things that I'm doing right now, is speaking to recruits at London Police to say, you have so much at your fingertips for resources to get help. Find out where you're at right now and while you're healthy, because the family members are the ones that are going to notice when things start to get tough, and when your first responder is starting to show the signs of PTSD, OSI, moral injury, whatever you want to call it. Those cracks are going to start to show, and the family are probably going to be the first ones to see it. Don't be afraid, because things got bad for us. We struggled through it. After diagnosis was taking the opportunity to have the hard conversations. One of us would say, I don't know how to say this, but I'm just going to put it out there and see kind of how things end up. And a big one was the conversation that we had when I said, I don't know where I fit. And so as a partner, we need to do this together. And if I don't know that you're struggling and having a problem, how can I support you? How can I help? We've done a couple of programs since, individually and together. And one of the best things that came out of that was asking each other, what do you need? Because just that little bit of, you can see that your partner's struggling. You can see that they maybe want to tell you something or need to get something off their chest. But by opening that door of saying, what do you need? How can I help? Where are we at? That gives them the freedom to speak. It's not to say that you won't, struggle with the outcome of the conversation, but it's better to get it out there than to keep it a secret. You're already struggling, you may as well just spit it out, right? And then move forward from there.
How did participating in mental health treatment improve your relationship with your first responder spouse?
I believe that in order to help someone else, you have to help yourself first. First responders, as you said, don't necessarily want to burden their family with what they've seen. But there is a fine line to walk where you can tell someone, I had a really bad day. I had a crappy call, I had whatever, and this is not about you. This is not about, I just don't know how to talk about it. I can't talk about it yet. By getting help and learning to use appropriate phrases rather than, what the hell's wrong with you? That kind of thing allows me to be more empathetic to what he's going through and what he's seeing. But it also allows him to see that I need to be part of the solution. It also gives us the opportunity to be open and honest without fear of being hurt or hurting the other person. And the biggest thing comes to conversation.
What advice would you give other first responder spouses watching this right now?
I want spouses to know that they're not alone. I felt hopeless. I felt like I was alone. There is help out there. You just have to look for it. And by asking the question, where do I go from here? That's the start. You need to ask the right people. Don't be afraid. I know several spouses who wanted to get help, but they were afraid what their spouse would think, what the neighbors would think, what the dog would think. Don't be afraid. If you need help, the best thing you can do for your first responder is to fill your own cup first. You need to be in a healthy place in order to support somebody who's going through a mental health challenge.